How and pawb. Welcome to Goldstone's bookshop here in Carmarthen and the Coracle Europe Fringe. I'm not Rachel Trezise, just to let you know. Sadly, Rachel had to pull out of the festival. She and her husband Darren are not very well, so they're unable to come today. So I'm going to be a poor stand-in. I certainly didn't edit this beautiful volume. I wish I could claim that I had. But I'm going to introduce to you the author of this volume, my good friend, Dr. Gemma June Howell, who is a wonderful performance poet, and I would know. I've shared the stage with her. She won the was a finalist of the John Tripp Award in 2010. An academic, an activist, very much a feminist, and I think we'll get some sense of that. The director of Women Publishing Wales and desk director with Honno, and still has the time to come to West Wales to share a little bit of time with us. Gemma's first collection was Rock Life, a collection of poetry, and then you had a selection of short stories with Havon books.
Inside the Treacle Well.
Inside the Treacle Well, yeah. And of course you've had things. Some of your dialect poetry has featured in other anthologies. Gemma also has a PhD in critical and creative writing, and that really is what leads us to this volume, because this developed out of your dissertation. And I'll tell you a little bit about this volume from the back cover, because you can't see the back cover from where you are now.
You sure?
Here's a little bit of the plot. So 1984, Gerlo Wolf is born into a world of pickets and poverty. Life on the rock is precious, but growing up is far from easy. Struggling with her mental health and the backlash of childhood trauma, she falls into a dark underworld of sex, drugs, and alcohol. Driven by the stories of home, Gerlo finds freedom in writing and strives to become a poet, discovering that her words are a vehicle to recovery and survivorhood. This is a gut-punching tribute to the reality of life in a post-industrial Britain. Gemma June Howell's debut novel is an authentic portrayal of the intergenerational struggles of working-class communities and one woman's journey to empowerment. And this is a little bit of what other people have said about the volume. It says, John Gower, it's the tale of a young poet finding out that life is like a pinball game, all flashing lights and obstacles. An important and urgent piece of writing, vivid, visceral, gut-punching, like nothing you've ever read. Clear Dabbeth. And Elaine Canning says, an unflinching depiction of working-class experiences within a post-industrial landscape. The crazy truth is an artwork that pounds the senses with every beat. I like the sound of that. An artwork that pounds the senses with every beat. And as Fleer says, like nothing you've ever read. So I think that's where I'm going to start. How is this an artwork? Why is it like nothing you've ever read? Because it's not just the content, Gem, which is new ground, I think, and will be so for a lot of readers of literary fiction. But it's also the style and the structure of the volume as well. So can you tell us a little bit about that and how it's been put together?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Before we start, I'd just like to say thanks very much for inviting me today, and to everybody involved in the Coracle Fringe. It's a real honour on this drizzly grey day as we all await Storm Bird. Yeah, so basically just picking up on what you said there, this started out as my PhD, and within the proposal that I initially put in, I wanted to explore the differences between Kunstler roman novels and Billingstone roman novels as well. And ordinarily, and kind of across the board, predominantly, Kunstler roman novels are usually written by men. So I did a little bit of research around that. But as I started writing the book, obviously we had the pandemic, and that hit my community quite hard. And there were a few people who committed suicide in a row. There were quite a few deaths. And as you know, everything was completely changing. The structures in society were completely changing. I was also bereaved as well. My grandmother had just passed away 2 months before, and she features quite a lot of the book. It's very much a homage to her and her life as a socialist feminist in the valleys. So I think that really the book then kind of took on another form. Really, it became a love letter, I suppose, to my younger self, to my community, and to women like me from working class backgrounds. But just circling back to what you said about the stylistic devices that I use within the book, I still wanted to retain that Kunstler Roman, that development of the artist, so element to the book. So what I did is I developed poems, because as you said earlier on, I began my writing career as a dialect poet. And this was just something that came along during the process, really. John Gower was my supervisor right at the very beginning. He was kind of dead against it, to be honest with you, not including poetry. And I remember when I did the MA, we were always told, no, you're either writing a collection of poetry or you're doing fiction. So I saw that as a kind of challenge, to be honest with you, you know, being the way that I am. I do like to challenge conventions. So I started to develop these concrete poems. And as you said, it's a feminist book. So I was looking into feminists who were talking about phallocentricity, and especially in kind of like the buildings and the structures and all of this kind of like, and I remember right at the very beginning of the book, Gerlo Wolf, who was the main character, who's loosely based on myself when I was younger, as she starts to write poems, she's actually in a police cell and she starts to scratch the poems with a hairpin. And she says, I'm going to scratch and I'm going to spray these poems over every big dick structure in society when I get out. So all the poems are phallic shaped, essentially. But what they do, I mean, you know, aside from talking about dicks, obviously, what they do is they show her development as an artist as well. So right at the very beginning, the poems are very raw. But towards the end, the final poem is in the shape of a tree, actually, which comes after she talks about the death of her great-grandmother, her grandmother, and the birth of her daughter. So there's that kind of intergenerational element to the book as well. So it explores, I think, about 4 or 5 generations. So it goes right the way back to the 70s. And we were a very young family. So at one point, there was 5 generations in our family when my grandmother was alive. Yeah. So yeah, I think what I've tried to do is push those literary conventions a little bit to write something, I suppose, that would, you know, kind of appeal to the type of reader who wouldn't usually read books. So people from the council estate where I'm from, I've had a lot of feedback. In fact, when I was on my way up to Aberdeen last weekend, I was stood outside the train station and somebody came over to me. And he was on the way to the pharmacy to pick up his methadone, and he asked me what I was doing, and I ended up reading him a couple of my poems, and he loved them. And I remember speaking to my father on the phone straight after. I was like, those are the exact people who I want to read this book. So I think what I'm trying to do really is, through the writing, especially with the dialect poetry as well, is to give voice to the people who are usually misrepresented, misaligned, silenced within the status quo, including culture and literature.
Yeah, I mean, there are no spoilers, because if you want to come to the later events as part of the festival today, then there will be some poetry from Gemma. She's going to read some of the poems from this collection, but it's going to be more prose in this afternoon's session.
I thought so.
So I don't think there's any spoilers then. If I perhaps ask a little bit about the poems. You said they're all concrete poems, and they show the development of the artist. What are the objects, and how might they form a narrative that might be treated as separate from the rest of the book?
That's a really interesting question, and one nobody's asked me, actually. Well, let's just try and think now. So I think it begins with a vodka bottle.
Yeah.
And then the next one is in the shape of a penis. And then the next one is, I'm just trying to think now. There's one I wrote about Christine Keeler, which is a hand, like this. I was part of this Christine Keeler symposium, and we were looking at how Christine Keeler was treated throughout the Profumo affair. But I took a different stance, rather than victimizing her, like a lot of the other poets in the symposium, I actually empowered her and said that she brought down a Tory government and exposed it for all its sleaze, and that she was from a working class background. And I write that actually at the end of one of the chapters about my nan. The next one is a drill, I Am Warman. That was actually part of the Christine Keeler symposium as well. And then there's another one that's a big bomb. So I'm not sure really. I think the bomb one is when she's in university studying politics. So, and it's kind of like a precursor of where we're at now. It's called Divide and Rule. I don't know. I'm going to have to go away and have a think about that and maybe develop it into another project.
It's interesting. It's interesting how the poems that have been introduced into the volume have come from other places as well. It wasn't as if I'm writing this novel now. Oh, it's time to stop and put a poem in. It's all part of the process.
Yeah, it was part of the writing process, because obviously all of these, while I was doing the PhD, then I did the Christine Keeler symposium. But also another thing as well, I'm just thinking about the vodka poem. I actually wrote that when I was a student. One of the first poems that I wrote when I went to university. Process. I've got like this big red trunk. It's like one of those dowry trunks, the Indian dowry trunks. And inside I've got lots of different notebooks from all the years. And whenever I got stuck, what to write next, I would just put my hand in like a lucky dip and pull it out. And I found the poem in the trunk. So it was, it was a bit, the whole process was serendipitous. Also as well, writing at that time, I had the time and the space to write because I'm a single mother. And when we had the lockdown, that gave me the opportunity and the space to write. I didn't have to be the mother at the school gates. I didn't have to go onto campus to do the workshops and things. So it was a real unique kind of, godsend, really, because I think that I'd probably still be doing the PhD now.
Strange, isn't it? It's strange the things that, the positives that come out of these terrible situations. But, as you said earlier, a lot of bad things going on as well. Okay. So you mentioned that those voices that you wanted to give power to. I don't know now whether you could expand on some of the dialect stuff, or whether you'd like to read a section that kind of reiterates that.
I will do. I just wanted to say as well, there's been some feedback, but it was never my intention to shock readers or to play into this kind of poverty porn notion. No. What I really wanted to do is show the kind of the complexities and the different sides of working class life. And I think that ties into my PhD research as well, which I did from a proletarian standpoint. So I just wanted to make that clear as well. So
well, I might hang on to that, because I think we'll have the reading, but I think the rest of your dissertation research would be interesting to hear a little bit about, because it informs us so well.
Okay. Ma'am, Crystal was laid up for a legitimate reason. She had broken her leg. That said, the accident hadn't happened because she attempted to damp-proof the ceiling of their basement flat, nor during a botched compo job, or even from a suicide attempt off a bridge. Crystal had been hit by a reversing car. It was surprising she didn't try to make a claim, but she would have struggled to present a plausible case, since she was paralytic drunk from her own home brew. Her streak of piss sister was not impressed. You were only meant to sample it, not drink the whole demi-john. Groggy, seeing you galloping down the high street in the middle of the afternoon. I only had a glass. Bloody car come out of nowhere, honest. Crystal spewed into a stuffed up washing up bowl. Stuff is fucking lethal. So she was bedbound. Nothing out of the ordinary, as this was usually the case with her perpetual hangovers. On weekends, she'd evaporate in bed, her dank pit like the inside of an empty wine bottle. Gerlo often wondered how she even got onto that mountain of stinking mattresses, all piled up like used tea bags slopped on the corner of the kitchen sink. Gerlo and Eddie longed to sleep on the mattress mountain, but unless it was a matter of life or death, they were forbidden to disturb their mam. Reaching her on a weekend morning was like something from G.I. Jane. After tackling the world's rickiest cushion bridge, Then climbing over the world's snappiest crocodile pit, they'd swim through a deadly moat of stilettos and studded leather before arriving at the door to her lair. Eddie was to cover Gerlo as she'd inch open the bedroom door. The sight of Crystal's flickering red toes in the mirror flagged danger, and at that point the door would certainly squeak. Freeze! Poised in paralysis, they'd yearn for the next sign of life. Then, with her heart firing like a machine gun, Gerlo's wet grip on Eddie's hand would sharpen and she'd whisper, quietly, "Shh, you first. No, you. You, soldier." Eddie was always sent in first. He'd slip in sideways, trying not to trip the squeaky hinge, then drop onto his hands and knees and scamper through a debris of tissues blotted with lipstick kisses, curls of cellophane from cigarette cartons, blister strips of pills and wine glasses and Lucozade bottles dropped like bombshells around the perimeter of the mattress mountain. Beside the plume of a bulging ashtray, Gerlo's mam's handbag hung in the gorge between the mountain and the bedside table. Above it, an ebony statue of a pregnant woman who surveyed the room, wide ivory eyes staring down at Eddie as he edged in for the target. "I can't. The woman, she's watching. Don't be so stupid. She's not real. What if Mammy catches us? She won't. You want biscuits, dunno? I'm starving. My belly hurts." Gerlo slipped in, did a quick tuck and roll just to show off, and snatched the handbag. Social Security Day was always a Friday, so they were certain there would be some surplus left over from the binge fund. After pinching Crystal's last couple of spent quid, Gerlo squirreled it into her sock. Then she and Eddie scaled the side of Mattress Mountain. Crystal moaned as she felt the gentle rock from their measured climb to the raggedy top. They slotted their freezing hands and feet into the gaps of each squalid layer and like hungry spiders scurry up to their mam, who like a blue bottle languished in the webbing from her uncovered duvet. "Mam, mam, wake up. Oh, kids, what's the time? We're hungry. Feed us, feed us, feed us." Whining repetition in unison was a proven tactic. "All right, just 5 more minutes. Where's my fags, kids? If we get your fags, then will you feed us?" "Yes, pass them up here." But this particular bedbound stretch was different. Instead of telling them to get the fuck out when they brought a pretend breakfast on a hand-me-down Bluebird kitchen, she beckoned them into the gloom. Her hair, dark and wet with sweat, slicked around their worried little faces as she paired their heads together and wailed into their scalps. "I'm so sorry, kids, so sorry this has happened to me," as she sniffed and sobbed. A slip of sun sliced through the gap in the curtains and lit up the side of her face. Her mascara bled into watercolour weeds, and she looked like a rag doll with broken eyes. "This was meant to be our fresh start, a new beginning. This is all your fucking father's fault, fucking bastard as he is, leaving us here like this. But we left him, Mam. I wanted a better life for us. All I wanted was a better life." And she continued to sob. Instead of the victorious mountaineers they'd initially envisaged becoming, she felt stranded now. How could they stop their mammy from being like this? Maybe they should buy her something with the money they'd nicked. Little steam breaths puffed from their lips as they shivered in the damp and the mildewed room. They jumped over the covers to catch up to their mammy, but she felt like an empty pillowcase. "Shall we make you a cup of tea, Mam?" "We'll make one with a hot tap. There's no money on the meter. I tell you what, when my leg's better, we'll go for a picnic in the park, just the 3 of us." But it wasn't just the 3 of them, and they didn't go to the park. Sorry, it's a bit sad actually, isn't it? That one is.
It's just that finish in there, yeah. And they didn't go to the park.
I know.
There's a lot about Gerlo and Eddie in the book.
Yeah.
And you spoke about these voices that you want, and you know there's some elements in that piece, I think. You spoke about these voices that you want to represent, that you want to empower, and you want to bring forward. And they represent a community, and there is a strong sense throughout the book of the morality of that community. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was just thinking then about the different. I was thinking about reading that then, and the response of the people here in the audience, and how that is very different response that I receive from the people from back home. They would find that very funny. And they would be very familiar to them. Do you know what I mean? And I, you know, I think there's a lot of things that I have read as well. It's really sad on the face of it and very tragic, but I find it really funny.
Yeah, there's
because you've got that reference. So yeah, what did you say about the morality? Sorry, what did you just ask?
Or just say that the volume itself is kind of a tale of that community's morality, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think what I wanted to try and show is the discrepancy really between the social ontology and the historical realism. When this particular scene was written, or it took place, I think it was like 1989-ish. Right. So we were in the Thatcher era. And there's another section in the book where Crystal is in her bedsit room with her two kids. And Margaret Thatcher was on the television and she's doing a speech about the seeds of goodness. And she's talking about children and making sure that they have everything they need. And at that time, she's like slopping on beans and spam cooked on a tabletop cooker, you know. So I wanted to show that stark contrast between this kind of neoliberal rhetoric that was being put out and how that differentiated and actually landed on the ground, actually, for people who were very far removed from the kind of middle class or upper class kind of audience that it was aimed at.
And what in the book do you feel you use to illustrate the tools that are necessary for that social mobility? I mean, what
education, yeah. So yeah, I wanted to go to the next chapter, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
So this is a continuation with a chapter in between, but basically the structure of the book as well. It's got two timelines as well, so it kind of jumps back as well in time. So it's one continuous timeline from the 200s, the noughties, but then it jumps back in time. So this one's called Crystal Clear. When Crystal's leg got better, she took the kids to stay with Scotty, who was okay while sober, but terrifying when drunk. His blue lips rippled like a deflating balloon as he jabbered incomprehensible shit to the untrained ears of Gerlo and Eddie. Scotty was Crystal's oldest drinking buddy. Dickie was Eric's, whose vernacular was far less decipherable than Scotty's, but he did cool tricks with fag packets, so the kids liked him better. Are you taking the piss? Scotty, get that slug out of my drain. I'm going to try and do that. I'm not very good at a Scottish accent. They had all met in service, the Imperial Services, a hotel where Crystal was a waitress, Eric a kitchen porter, Scotty the chef, and Dickie the barman. Dickie had tried to get fresh with Crystal quite early on in their acquaintance. See this? Eric had growled, holding the stem of a wine glass firmly up Dickie's left nostril. If you touch it again, it will meet your brain. After that, Eric and Dickie were the best of mates. The Imperial Four, as they'd refer to themselves, always had a blast. Dickie and Scotty would go out shopping. Shopping meant shoplifting for booze. And after a quick spree in the local offie, they'd always bring back the same order of 3 40-ounce bottles of Smirnoff, a bottle of Malibu for Crystal, and bells for Dickie. Did you remember the pineapple juice, Scott? Called Crystal. Malibu, vodka and pineapple juice was her favourite tipple. What'd you take me for, lassie? I wouldn't deprive her of her fancy punch, but God only knows what she'll do. Once every drop of booze had been downed, they'd hit the clubs. Dickie was a good asset on the piss because he could act the hard man, but really he was soft as shit. Years later, he'd gotten into a fight on Christmas Eve, or maybe it was Boxing Day, and he had his 2 front teeth knocked out. All I want for Christmas is my 2 front teeth, my 2 front teeth, my 2 front teeth. The last time Eric saw Dickie was sleeping under a bridge, and the last he'd heard, Dickie was dead. Scotty had 2 volume settings: loudspeaker when wankered, silent when hungover. Chrissy, 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 he'd cry like a dying Hoover when Crystal was on the turn. Gerlo's parents had a turning point when drinking. One minute they'd be the centre of attention, entertaining the crowd with outrageous anecdotes. Then One of them would have that one too many, and bang! On many occasions they'd fallen into the alcoholic abyss and all hell had broken loose. On one occasion, Eric's 21st birthday, like a scene from EastEnders, Crystal had shoved a whiskey tumbler into his mouth, blood gushing down his new denims. "No more designer jeans for you, Sonny Jim," she sneered after the divorce went through. "Happy birthday to you, squash tomatoes and stew, bread and butter in the gutter, happy birthday to you." Meanwhile, instead of playing in the promised just the three of us lush green park, Eddie and Gerlo had a day out in the concrete jungle with herds of tourists who'd flocked to the square on this typically British overcast day. And instead of a picnic, they got a flimsy bag of bird feed that they pretended to enjoy thrashing over the lion statues. "You've never been here before, have you, kids? Look at those pigeons." Crystal tossed some seed into the air. She was half cut from downing 2 pints of cider en route. At least her mood had stabilised. "Manky fucking things. I'll rip their wings off," blurted Scotty. "Rats to the sky, watch out or they'll drop fleas on your head will be looping." Why did everyone hate pigeons so much? As the undervalued lumpen proletariat of the avian world, they're resourceful, resilient, community-spirited and monogamous to boot. Crystal sang, "Catch the pigeons, catch the pigeons, catch the pigeons, ah-woo!" The kids were being eaten alive, and once their palms were empty of feed, the birds dispersed and pecked the ground with their barnacled beaks, pig feet malformed and bubbled up like burnt plastic, the odd toenail poking out. "Look, kids, there's Oppet," Eric used to say, pointing to an old molting pigeon who, like a retired army general, hobbled outside the train station. Gerlo often wondered how their feet came to be so mangled. One time, while she waited for her dad at the ticket office, Gerlo asked Oppet if his feet were bad from carrying special messages in a little satchel over the sea. He told her no, his feet were bad from walking up and down the high street all day looking for crumbs to eat. She suggested that he fly elsewhere. "You've got wings, haven't you?" Dickie told her that their feet were fucked because some rich fuckers laced their windowsills with acid. It makes her feel sick to her stomach. It made her feel sick to her stomach. But why? They never done nothing to no one. She could just see those rich fat cats with spiky grins in their monochromatic suits, spraying the sills of their castles to protect the facade from streaks of pigeon shit. The lion sculptures were also drizzled with plops of poo and teeming with beaming kids who scrambled up for a souvenir snap. As Gerlo and Eddie sprung around the square, tossing feed like it was fucking fairy dust, Scotty and Crystal had words. Crystal cutching into the crook of Scotty's bony neck. I don't know who he is anymore, Scott. You've changed. I can't go back, not this time. And anyway, I've moved on. We've moved on." "Changed, you say?" He was always away, man, and I know he wants to do it for the kids, but we had no money all the time, and I didn't see him. I was on my own all the time, man. He doesn't seem to realise that I am the one at home with the kids all the time. I would have loved to gone off myself. I would have loved to have done more with my life. I had to get off that fucking rock. From what he said, Crystal, he's done it for the weans and for you. Education is the only way out, and there's nothing left. No, these things are never crystal clear, dear. Scotty passed her a cigarette, and they shared a light and smoked and waved at the kids. "Take a picture of us," the kids cried, but nobody had a camera. "Right, time to go, kids. It's getting cold," Crystal said, stubbing out her ciggy. They didn't want to go back to Scotty's because he lived in a high-rise in a rough area where the kids were unfriendly and spoke funny. Last time they were there, they'd encountered a rogue pit bull terrier who chased them around the block, a haunting memory which spawned a deep-seated fear of all fighting dogs. "Come on, kids, it's starting to spit." Crystal was starting to get her hair off. They could tell. The faint curl of her lip quivered to expose her scary toothed face. Scotty stood up, still dodging the flocks and their fleas. But the kids didn't move from the lions. They felt like the Pevensey children from The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, crusaders for all that was good, riding Aslan to victory against the White Witch and her minions. Crystal wasn't best pleased and eventually had to bribe them with a Happy Meal to get off those fucking lions. And instead of the Happy Meal, they got a clip around the ear. We have been here before, Gerlo spat in a burning strop as they weaved through the crowd at the square's edge. Dad brought us here, and he bought us a Happy Meal. Well, your father's got more money than I have. I got you too, haven't I?
So you give permission to the audience to laugh at.
Yeah.
So where is the rock? And how, I mean, everybody wants to get off the rock. I've got to get off the rock. I want to get away. We need to move on. So how does Gerlo get that access to what she needs to?
So the rock is a little small council estate that's just outside of Caerphilly on the way to Machen. We're family originally from Machen, a little parish. And the rock, or Gregoraka, Rock of Dawn, I think people say it, the translation is Rock of Dawn, but I don't think it's that, because while researching this book, I found it was something else. I can't remember now though, but it's called the Rock. And my father always used to say that it's like Alcatraz. So there was always this kind of yearning to get away from it. But I think it was different, you know. I mean, I was born in 1983, even Gerlo was in 1984 in the book. I did it to coincide with the miners' strikes. But before then, there was a huge sense of community and a massive kind of like matriarchal presence, which kind of it stayed really when I came to live. But the social deprivation kind of went worse and worse and worse, even under Blair as well. And when we had the European funding as well, we had a lot of European funding, but a lot of it was wasted on repebbled ash from the bloody and potting nice plants.
Well, they're still building there.
Yeah.
So no.
So where did that money go? So you can understand when people are, you know, angry and they feel let down. But so it's a council estate and it's built on a hill, and there's one way in and one way out. And I think in another poem I say built to contain the blue bloodthirsty miner masses, and now a ghetto for their wasted grandkids. So it was kind of to contain the rabble rousers, the miners. So there was always this feeling that we need to get out. And even though we were on this council estate, there was beautiful panoramic views, and the sunsets were lovely. And I think we were talking earlier on about the poem and the one competition that I ever come in anything in, and it was called Fear of the Unknown. And I remember writing that when I was 17. So it was always, you know, even though we were kind of stuck there, it was always kind of the horizon beckoned us type of thing. And it was a beautiful place to write. There's a lot of nature writing in there as well, and also as well political writing. So it gave you that kind of.
And I think that's commonplace in those communities, because they all have the same. They're all built on the cheapest, highest land, and so in Town Hill you have Swansea Bay. You know, it's those wonderful views, and
well, the council estate where I'm in now in West Cross is being completely gentrified. You know, it's interesting living there, because you've got a lot of houses there that are right to buy, and there's a lot of people who live there who are like, you know, petit bourgeois, you know, middle class, upper middle class. But then the council tenants who live there are vilified. Do you know what I mean? So there's this real kind of like insidious kind of civil war that's going on between these two different classes. But they want to build now at the moment up on the common, and they said, oh, it'll be affordable housing. So there's a huge campaign at the minute. I think Ray Howells has written this, My Uncommon Common, which is a collection of poems. And we all know that's not going to happen, because you want to see the views up there. They're spectacular, and it's in Mumbles. Do you know what I'm saying? So
really affordable.
So I don't think that bit said much about education, but I just wanted to say the characters from the pieces that I just read then. So Crystal is loosely based upon my mother, and Eric is my father. And what happened during the miners' strikes, there was a migration, and a lot of people moved down to Folkestone, which is where this book is set. Set, in some parts of it, to go across the channel for the fag one and the booze one.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of smuggling that went on. But then also as well, in the case of my mother and father, they went off to London and they worked in service in London. And a little bit later in that chapter, they actually meet. I talk about Scotty, who's one of their friends. He puts the film on, The Elephant Man.
Mm-hmm.
And funny enough, they actually meet Anthony Hopkins in the lift in the Imperial Services. And Anthony Hopkins is always like cropped up in our family history as well. Years later, my nan was a member of the Tommy Cooper Appreciation Society, and we went to Philly Castle for a meal, and Anthony Hopkins was there. My whole table were like, go and get the autograph. Gave me these menus with the fez on, and Anthony Hopkins was really annoyed. But it like kind of crops up in our family history, and it's kind of in the book as well. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know why I'm saying that for, but I just thought I'd pop that in.
It's a theme.
Yeah. But there's a mention there about the education. So at that time, Crystal had moved back to Folkestone with Gerlo, with the kids, and then that eventually led to the abuse of Gerlo. But meanwhile, Eric had gone up to up to Coleg.
Yeah.
And he was studying under the trade unions, a lot of the major trade unionists of the time. So that's where a lot of our education come from as well. So as a child, there's not much of it in the book, there's a little bit, but we were often taken to London to go on a lot of the demonstrations and the marches in London, the Free Nelson Mandela marches and the ANC marches. And we were there at a lot of the meetings as well. So, and my dad at the time, he was seeing somebody who was a black feminist, and we used to spend a lot of time in Elephant and Castle. It was big meetings full of women who would come and they would plan their campaigning. So that's where the campaigning and the activist kind of element comes from. And we always had books, but we had socialist books given to us to read, and books with ideas and with impact and meaning, you know. Yeah. And education was always kind of, it was never off the cards. So my brother's a doctor as well. He's a criminologist and he's a lecturer. So so we really tried to push for that. And I do believe that it has given us social mobility. However, you know, as you know, there's no money in being a writer. I'm still skint. Got like 1,000 jobs.
Was that a picture of selling the books afterwards, Gemma? But all that structure, you know, it is socialist. It's socialist values that enable that education. It's kind of that self-education, and those structures were also there, like committees. It enabled people to work properly as organised bodies.
Well, all the women there used to basically run the community when we had money as well. But then when the money dried up, obviously they couldn't do it. They already had 10 jobs of their own. Yeah. So they were running the youth club. And there's a chapter in here as well where I start off after the youth club closed. We didn't have anything else to do. So there's a whole chapter on how we smoked dope. And we had like a bucket place that we called it. And because there was nothing else to do. But even within that, we found creativity and you know, and obviously and we still had the nature with the woods as well, which was still inspirational. So yeah, it was sad because when the money went, then all of the services, but the women still pushed on. Did. And my nan was a community councillor for Bedwas to Thomas and Macken, and she was in Welsh Women's Aid, and so we still tried against all the odds. So yeah,
and are still trying.
And we are still trying, and we're doing it through education and literature now.
And your role as Director of Women Publishing Wales is an absolute legacy of from your family.
We've only been going a year.
But it's been good.
Hold your horses.
It's been good. Okay, well, let's get back from from here and now to very much to the crazy truth.
So this kind of feeds into the education part. So this is a little bit later now. It comes into this part of the timeline where it's going forward rather than back. And it's when Gerlo is basically has an interview to do the MA at Swansea University. So that was with Nigel Jenkins, and Nigel Jenkins, I did an interview with him, funny enough, but I've lost it because it was on one of those old MP3 but with the whole recording, I know I'm gutted. But I did take a lot of the interview and I put it into this chapter. So it's a little bit of an ode to him as well, because he gave me a chance. Well, everybody else were like, oh, who is this swearing, crazy, bloody Tasmanian devil of a socialist feminist? Nigel gave me a shot. This one's called Valley's Poet. There was a knock on the grotto door. Excuse me, the lighthouse bard said. Yes, come in. The head of a messy-haired male appeared. Oh, I'm sorry. No, not at all, the lighthouse bard said. Gerlo fidgeted in her chair. Maybe she had said too much. It was difficult to get a word in edgeways with her. Maybe she wasn't the right kind of person. She wasn't exactly the literary type. She'd spent most of her time getting smashed with stoners who claimed to have a degree from what they called the University of Life. Gerlo perused the book's titles on the shelf while the man and the lighthouse bard chatted. What did people do before they could write? They told stories, she thought. Hearing stories was more engaging than being faced with a text written in a language sculpted for someone who wasn't her, about someone she couldn't relate to. Where were the real people in the books they did at school? The closest she got to feeling an affinity with the character was Celie from The Colour Purple. The story reminded her of the women she'd grown up around, Nanny Pearl, Grandmama, Hera, and even Crystal. All women who told stories to make things better, darning the gaping holes between what the world said about them and the lives they led. Gerlo had gut-cried over that book. She felt she knew Celie and was so angry when Hollywood went and tore the soul right out of the book, turning it into an over-sexualized lesbian story. It was really about female love, strength, solidarity, and the creativity required to overcome spiritual suffocation at the hands of an oppressive colonial patriarchy. Their patchwork quilt reminded Gerlo of a story Nanny Pearl had told her about going to jail for pinching a frozen leg of lamb. Prison was like a holiday, her Nan said. No fights, no mess or husbands to deal with, just women who struggled to keep their family benefits out of their pockets of their beer-soaked men of the house. And when she'd finished her stretch, the girls had sewn her a patchwork quilt. She kept it as a memento of their friendship. Yes, all in order, the lighthouse bard continued, chatting to the man who popped in. Then, oh, he said, turning to introduce Gerlo. This is our new addition. She's a Valley's poet. What did that mean? She never wrote much. Well, not in the traditional sense. She wrote in her head, narrating what she witnessed, feeling her way through vision and sound, transforming them into scribbles, graffiti, verses, rants, stories to be told. At university, she became confused by the hypocrisy and duality of life, which plainly presented itself. It wasn't that she couldn't write, just that she wasn't made to feel like it wasn't that she couldn't write, just that she was made to feel like she didn't have the right to. She'd gone to a comprehensive school with its limited curriculum designed to prepare its pupils for useful work. Writing was for the elite. Fantastic! The man held out his hand to greet her. Good to meet you. Did he just say new edition? Had she been accepted on the course? This is the editor of an independent press we have here on campus, the lighthouse bard said. Yes, and we welcome submissions. I don't think I'm good enough to get anything published. The editor smiled before swiftly departing. Right, where were we? Lorca? The great wonder-working Lorca. He loved the persecuted traveller community of his native Andalusia. The lighthouse bard plucked a volume from its shelf. He reimagines them in his poetry as representative of the fireblood and alphabet of universal truth. Gerlo could see how disciplined he was. Her discipline was still a work in progress. She'd spent the first 2 years of her degree in a vodka blur, wallowing in her pit of a bedroom, contemplating suicide, scrawling the odd crude poem amid a dope haze. The cultural shift from lawless chavette to politics student was seismic. She'd pulled it out of the bag in her final year, but still she wondered if she was good enough. I think you'll like him. He was a poet of the people who put soul before profit. Thank you. She took the book. Did she have the capacity, ability, mental agility, the vocabulary even to convey her thoughts in a way that was publishable? Was she ready to expose herself? What would happen if she dug that box up out of her? She was shit scared. She felt like an oiled seabird washed up by a crude, corrupted ocean, feathers bogged in gloop, only the tiniest glint of life in her eyes. Because she didn't know what was on the other side of the cliff, whether it levelled out, or if there was a massive drop, it'd be easier to stay with the broken birds, too weary or heavy to fly. Have you read any work by Burns, Scottish poet? Well, I know Old Lang Syne. Well, I say I do. I forget the words every New Year's Eve. I think you must push the dialect stuff all the way. Okay, will do. And think about coming on our walk when you start in October. Start? You mean I got in? If you'll have us, you have a concrete foundation for something really great, yeah? If you say so. Take this too. A few hints and tips from some of the best writers in the country. He handed her a dog-eared insert from The Guardian. She pulled the door behind her, wondering what he'd meant about her having them. Wasn't it meant to be the other way round? She liked the sound of being a Valley's poet. It's got a good ring to it. And instead of the pub, she headed to the library. In an old trolley of books for resale, she found a small book with a picture of a stout, chilled-looking monkey on the cover. She began to read the introduction. Bonobos, a matriarchal, egalitarian social structure. Rather than using aggression to solve disputes, the bonobos use sex. Therefore, they are known as the sexy monkeys. The human species is more closely related to the DNA of bonobos than chimpanzees, thereby undermining the claim for an evolutionary patriarchal organization of societal structures. From a feminist hermeneutical perspective, it is also interesting to note that the bonobos are described as pygmy chimpanzees, reducing their status per male-centric qualities of height and strength. Such physical attributes and masculine behaviors are widely recognized as a decisive factor in the origins of gender inequality, which also carry the hallmarks of chimpanzee culture, from which we all supposedly evolved. What was hermeneutical? She didn't choose this existence. She'd been born into it, a toxic patriarchal world order in which her subjectivity had been severed, leaving her feeling devalued as a human being. Just like the bonobo, she was second class, a poor relation. She took out her notepad, where she'd scribbled a quote by Sartre. A man is always a teller of tales. He is surrounded by his stories and the stories of other men. Beneath it she wrote, but what of the stories of women, or more precisely, my women, erased, undermined, or misrepresented in the greater narratives of our white privileged forefathers? The girl unfolded the Guardian pullout and began reading the top 10 tips for writing. Read, and when you feel you've read enough, read some more. But what about living? Didn't that count for anything? Never mind tips. What about truth? She took up the pen and began to write. We've got enough time left.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
That's what I was going to say.
Okay.
Read and please read into the crazy truth. And
so then this is the crazy truth. And this is the book. The crazy truth. 1. Take life by the scruff of the neck. Live it to its fullest. And write not from an ivory tower, but from your sacred fount. Write from life itself. 2. Talk, converse, and listen to everyone as true equals. We will only achieve real change through unfettered discussion and debate. 3. Forgive yourself for not reading all the classics. Admit when you haven't finished reading some books, or don't rate the books the reviews told you were epic. 4. Cherish those who were there for you on the way up, for they'll be the people who were there for you on the way down. Be grateful to all those who supported you. 5. Read philosophy, then seek answers through the lens of marginalised others. 6. Immerse yourself in all cultures, then find commonalities to unite, fight and write. 7. Take pride in your cultural heritage, honour your ancestors and the sacrifices they made. 8. Dive headfirst into the unknown, embrace your wild side, challenge conventions, and dare to be defiant in your creativity. Growth flourishes in uncharted waters, so take risks and fearlessly explore them. 9, shoot for the moon and land among the stars. Yet, in our ascent, let's not forget the individual is born of the collective. Our personal victories should serve as beacons, lifting communities forgotten by time. Instead of pulling up the ladder, let's celebrate our triumphs collectively and extend a hand to one another. 10, find your tribe. In a world governed by complex networks and seemingly impenetrable structures, it's crucial to forge our own paths. Despite the obstacles, trust in the potency of your words, as they possess a depth and influence far greater than you can imagine.
What a manifesto. Thank you, Gemma. I can't think of a better way to end. So, thank you very much.
Yes.
The book is here. I'm sure Gemma would be happy to write a little dedication, sign any copies for any that you'd like to buy.
Thanks for having me.
Press stop, I guess. Nice one, Gem.